Hello everyone, I welcome you to the CEC lecture series. I'm Nupur Chawla, teaching English literature at Maitri College, Delhi University. And today's lecture, we are going to continue our discussion of an important feminist text that is called We Should All Be Feminists, which was written in 2012 by the Nigerian feminist Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. In the previous lecture, we discussed that how Adichie's essay has certain important, signposts where she displays not just this conviction of the fact that how gender construction needs to be or the constructedness of gender needs to be factored in. She brings her attention to the fact that how gender is constructed and we need to look at it critically. Second, we also said that how in this essay one notes a change-oriented stance of the writer. The third point that we had made was that we see that she is a Nigerian feminist, so her ethnicity also comes to have a bearing upon her idea of gender, and that is something which we need to keep in mind. Fourth, we also said that in her essay, she the two important points that she makes in the beginning are that the way she has faced challenges of as a feminist in a Nigerian society, right? How she's had to constantly confront biases, she's had to constantly be at loggerheads with the existing ideas and wrong ones about women, where and particularly feminists, where feminists have been tagged as angry women, as dissatisfied women. They have been tagged as those who are always very, very vociferous and sometimes even unnecessarily so. So all these ideas, she says, I was constantly judged. So you see, all throughout in the essay, she mingles her personal anecdotes with the theoretical points that she makes, right? So all these ideas we discussed in the previous lecture. Now we are going to take forward this discussion and see what are the further points that she makes in the essay. So first, she of course confronts the stereotypes against feminists, and she assertively states that I decide to call myself a happy Nigerian feminist. The second important point is where she talked about that particularly this incident where she wrote an article and she was called or titled as as coming across as very, very angry in that write-up. And there she says that anger is incredibly important, and I'm happy if I came across as angry, because anger has a long history of bringing about change, right? And that is where also she makes this very important point that as humans we have this ability to remake ourselves for the better, to evolve ourselves. And anger is that emotion which makes us look critically at what is wrong in society and aim for bringing about a change. So after having established these 2 points, she moves on to the next idea, where she talks about social conditioning and fixed gender roles, right? Now she says, and I quote, "If you are a woman, you are not supposed to express anger because it is threatening," unquote. Now again, these are not Adichie's views. So it says, if you are a woman, you are not supposed to express anger because it is threatening. Now this statement is an extension of the reference of this incident where somebody had called her essay very angry. So she says that the fact that someone came up to her and pointed this out, that you come across as angry. So she says that this is the kind of understanding, this is a kind of a deep-rooted belief in the society that if you're a woman, then you're not supposed to express anger because it is threatening. Now again, first a set of words that strike us are that you're not supposed to. So who decides who's supposed to do what, right? That is a question that we must keep in mind. So as a woman, you're not supposed to express anger. So this phrase "supposed to" in itself brings the idea of social conditioning, social expectations, the established norms which guide people's behavior in society, right? And likewise, women are then limited by this conception that how they are not supposed to be angry, okay? And it says that also why? Because it is threatening. Now this is this is like an important twist to the statement that she brings over here. Why is a woman not supposed to express anger? Anger is very much a human emotion. And if a woman expresses it, what's wrong? Then she says, because it is threatening. A woman's anger threatens whom? Those who are subjugating her, those who are maybe unnecessarily asserting their authority, wrongfully so. And if in such situations, in such conditions, if a woman becomes angry, this anger comes across as a threat. And in order to curb this threat, in order to make sure that this tendency does not flare up, a woman is nipped in the bud, like the concerned person also tried to do the same to Adichie when he said that your article was very angry, right? The next important point that she also makes vis-a-vis social conditioning, she says, and I quote, "We spend too much time teaching girls to worry about what boys think of them, but the reverse is not the case," unquote. Okay, now this quotation again comes in this particular context where she is talking about, now in the essay, she's talking about the experience of her American woman friend, right? So she says that she discusses her experience at her workplace, whereby there was a meeting and she wanted to express herself. She kind of also showed this desire that she has a point, but the boss did not give her the chance to speak up, right? And she did not express resentment out in the open. Adichie says instead she went to the washroom and cried in private. And commenting on this, she said that we are, and particularly girls and women, are taught, are conditioned this way, so that they think that they are very, very conscious about what others think of them. And this idea that what others will think of me is something which is the starting point of the limiting of potential of women, right? Something which limits their potential. This idea that what will others think of me, and particularly what will men think of me. So she says that we spend too much time teaching girls to worry about what boys think of them. So they are very, very conscious about the way they come across, the way they dress up, the way they conduct themselves, the way they are perceived. In fact, to an extent, what Adichie is also saying is that their own sense of self, their selfhood, is very closely linked to how others view them, right? And this, she says, is a tendency which is not natural to people or women. Instead, it is what society has inculcated. Because we have taught girls that you need to be careful that how you conduct yourself. You need to be careful, what you wear, what you say, what you speak. Else, you will be perceived a certain way. So that's what she says, that this consciousness about one's own self, this self-image, is restricted to women alone. A society does not condition men to worry about what women would think of them. A man would not worry about what a particular act of his would make a woman think of him. So that is, even if it might exist, but comparatively, this kind of an apprehension in women is seen to be of a higher percentage as compared to those in men, right? That's the point that Adichie is saying. So she says that the reverse then is not true. Okay. Now, having talked about this, these values, these expectations that society, projects onto men and women, she says now the solution lies in deconditioning, right from the early stages of individuals' development. Now, if such is a society which makes people think that this is what men are supposed to do or this is what women are supposed to do, then where lies the answer? If such traditional thought limits women particularly, how do we delimit them? So one of her one of the solutions that she gives is that the solution lies in deconditioning, and over here she gives a very crucial importance to childhood. So she says that in the early stages of an individual's development, right thoughts, right attitudes, right approach needs to be introduced. So let's see what she actually says in this essay, about this in the essay. She says, and I quote, "We should begin to dream about and plan for a different world, a fairer world, a world of happier men and happier women who are truer to themselves. And this is how to start. We must raise our daughters differently. We must also raise our sons differently," unquote. And this is a very important, point that she makes in her essay. First, of course, here she talks about a fairer world. Fairer, which is just to not only women, but also men. Okay? And let's not forget, in this quotation, she says she's dreaming of a world which has happier men and happier women both, right? Who are truer to themselves, as she says. So 2 points are made here. First, that as a feminist, she does not just restrict her engagement to, the question of women alone. Instead, she also has in mind those traditions, those values which curb men as individuals too. So that is how she, through her argument, also kind of pushes the frontiers of feminism, which also most of us are aware of, that how it is not only an idea of equality for women, but instead it also talks about some kind of an equality for, or some kind of a fair play for men as well, right? It factors in the cause of men as well, right? And the other point that we also notice here is that we should aspire to a world of happier men and happier women who are truer to themselves. Now, this is a very important assertion. Truer to themselves. What does it mean? What does it mean when we say that an individual is supposed to be true to themselves? Let's consider this thought in conjunction with what we had just now discussed of social conditioning. So one is that individuals act out of the way they have been conditioned, the way they have been, made to believe. It's like where you do not think critically, but you just keep on existing in this automatic, mode. Okay? But on the other hand, is a conscious way of living, where you are aware of your thoughts, you're aware of your ideas, you're aware what impact your ideas and your thought have on other people and to a society at large. And also that you are able to conduct yourself more honestly as how you truly feel. You have the freedom to express your convictions. You have the space to say what you want, to say what you believe in. And that is the kind of world that Adichie is imagining. And this is a very important statement, and we should go over it again. And she says that a world of happier men and happier women who are truer to themselves. So what we also see is that she is aspiring for a society where people are more in touch with their aspirations, with their convictions, and they have the space to also express them. So again, we see a lot of faith that Adichie reposes in the human ability, in the human capacity, right? And so this vision of this world where we have happier men and happier women who are better in touch with themselves, how to achieve that? She says, and this is how to start. We must raise our daughters differently, and we must also raise our sons differently. Now, what does this mean? She clearly is talking about a kind of an alternate conditioning. And she says that this needs to begin right from childhood. The kind of practices, the kind of language that we use around children, the kind of ideas that we instill in them right from the beginning, the beliefs that we instill in them, as they grow up, they solidify and become very strong acts, right? So therefore, it's important for us to be very mindful of how we are raising our daughters. And she says, and also not just daughters but sons. And she says that we need to do it differently. So the word differently is very clearly mentioned here. So, and what is the difference? Or what different does she want? Or how does she envision this difference? She says that we need to go beyond these stereotypes. That how women are not supposed to be angry, men are supposed to be the breadwinners, men are supposed to be, they are not supposed to be emotional. All these are ideas that we bring up our children with, daughters or sons. And this is what she is hitting out at. She says, let individuals be. Do not raise such solid barriers of gender that individuals find themselves constricted in them, right? So this is a very, evolved argument that Adichie makes in this essay. And we also see that she has faith then in the values inculcated right at the time, at the right time, and the human ability then to consistently perfect the self, right? So if these values are inculcated at the right time, which is during childhood, then human beings or as individuals, we have the ability to also then imbibe them, and not just imbibe them but also at the same time keep examining them in between, right? Because what she is right now suggesting is a kind of a revision in the way we approach our upbringing of our children, right? So here the next point that she also makes is that she's not only talking about this kind of an alternate conditioning in childhood, which is the need of the hour, but she further emphasizes upon the stereotypes that limit men also. So she is now further expanding on the logic that why do we need to raise our sons differently and girls differently, or daughters differently. Now, what is the need for this kind of a different upbringing? That's because she says that it's not just girls, it's also boys who are limited then by these certain norms as they grow up. Okay. Now, what does she exactly say? Let's look at this quotation from the text. She says, and I quote, "We stifle the humanity of boys. We define masculinity in a very narrow way. Masculinity is a hard, small cage, and we put boys inside this cage." Right? Now, very clearly, what is she saying here? Very beautifully, she is expressing that how humanity of boys is also compromised. So again, let's not forget, her emphasis is on humanity. And how is it compromised? When even the definitions of masculinity are as limiting as definitions of femininity are. So it's like a hard, small cage, she says, and we put inside and we put boys inside it. What is the definition of masculinity? She discusses this at length even in the essay, that how boys are kind of conditioned right from the childhood that you will be the bread earner of the family. You will have to shoulder the responsibility of the family. You cannot express your emotions openly. You have to be the one bearing the so to say the flag of the family. What are these? These are again what Adichie would call a hard, narrow, small cage in which we put our boys. And she says we need to go beyond this as well. Now, thereafter, she talks about the idea of socialization, language, and the construction of gender roles. Right? She says that we are all social beings. We internalize ideas from our socialization. Even the language we use illustrates this. The language of marriage is often language of ownership and not a language of partnership, unquote. Now here, very directly, after talking about the idea of desocialization, or she actually she actually very clearly states that why do we need to engage with this process of conditioning or deconditioning, etc. She says because as social beings we are constantly going through this process of socialization. Socialization means what? That how we are shaped by different forces by means of our presence in society. So she says that we internalize ideas through this process of socialization. Internalize, we sometimes even unconsciously make ideas a part of our actions, of our beliefs, because those ideas are popular around us. That is the crux of socialization, as she says. And she says that one of the foremost ways of indicating this is to look at the language. She says that when you look at the language of marriage, it is not a language of partnership, it's a language of ownership. That one person owns another, while the institution of marriage is supposed to bring together two people. Why should it mean that the man is supposed to, so to say, own the woman? Right? So she is basically bringing our attention to even the structures of language that exist around us, which then become tools for us to think through this process of socialization. The next point that she makes is that how the word feminist is always suspect. Okay? She says, and I quote, some people ask, why the word feminist? Why not just say you're a believer in human rights or something like that, unquote. So you see, calling oneself a feminist is questioned by people, and instead they prefer that you call yourself a believer in human rights and not exactly a feminist. And this, as I was telling you even in the previous lecture, this is the bias that she's confronting. What is wrong with the word? Why is the word, why society, so to say, threatened with this idea? That is something that she further engages with in the essay, right? And then the last point that she makes in the essay is the idea of culture. She says that how culture acts as a justification for inequality, and also it carries the potential for social change. So you see, culture is this two-dimensional concept, which A is used to justify inequality on the one hand, and on the other hand, Adichie says that this very same culture also carries within it the potential for social change. What does she say? Let's look at this. Quote, she says, some people will say a woman is subordinate to men because it is our culture. But culture is constantly changing, unquote. So what is happening here? Culture is called to rescue in order to justify why is a woman subordinate to man. They say that it is part of our culture. It is part of our culture that a woman is supposed to serve the man. It is part of our culture that a woman is supposed to conduct herself a certain way with the man. It's all culture. And this is what Adichie is pointing out. That how culture then is very conveniently brought in to, sugarcoat this grave inequality. Just because something has been practiced for a lot of time does not mean that it is right. This is the point that Adichie is, bringing our attention to. So that's why in this quote, the last sentence that comes is, but our culture is constantly changing. So if a woman is supposed to be subordinate to a man because some people say that it is our culture, Adichie says we also need to remember that our culture is constantly changing. We need to bring a change in this concept, right? So she is indicating here that how the phenomena of culture, the phenomena of agreed, accepted values and traditions is often brought to justify the practices of such injustice. The last important point that she makes about culture, and with which she also closes her essay, is very important. Let's look at this quote. She says, what is the point of culture? Culture functions ultimately to ensure the preservation and continuity of a people. Culture does not make people. People make culture. If it is true that the full humanity of women is not our culture, then we can and we must make it our culture, unquote. So two important points here. So she says that when culture is brought as justification of inequality, she says that let's first understand what is the point of culture, right? It is supposed to ensure the preservation and continuity of a certain group of people. And she says that we need to remember that culture does not make people, but people make culture. So while, yes, you might think that culture does condition people, but what Adichie wants us to focus instead on is the fact that how culture, set of shared values, a set of shared practices, a set of beliefs, who constructed them? People did. So she's bringing our attention not just to a constructedness of gender, but she's also bringing our attention to a constructedness of culture. And she says that once we are aware of the fact that we are the ones who make such ideas, we then can understand that we also have the potential to change it. So she says that if it is true that the full humanity of women is not culture, then we can and must make it our culture. So she says that if women, according to culture, are supposed to be subordinate to men, then let us remind ourselves that this culture needs to be changed, right? And women in their full humanity, which means what? Women who have realized their full potential as human beings. If that becomes our goal, that should become also the center of our culture, right? So we've seen that how in this essay, Adichie, while she seems to be making very simple, straightforward arguments, but she's hitting out at some of the crucial questions that surround us even today. The question of socialization, the question of conditioning, the question of culture, the question of constructedness of gender, and the importance of, through all of this, the importance of the critical spirit that we all need to have, the spirit to question, the spirit to, understand what works for human freedom and what does not, and keep at the center the human interest in mind instead of being divided over the questions of masculinity and femininity. So these are some of the arguments that Adichie makes in this essay, and I would urge you to read this and also look at the other important arguments that she makes in other works of nonfiction as well. Thank you.